The summer heat pressed down on the small frontier settlement like a heavy wool blanket. Rose Bennett stood perfectly still on the warped wooden planks outside the trading post. Her hands folded at her waist, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. She had learned long ago that stillness was safety, that silence was survival. Around her, men bargained over furs and whiskey, their voices rough and careless. Her father, Thomas Bennett, stood nearby counting coins with practiced fingers. His weathered face showed no emotion as he discussed his daughter's future as casually as one might discuss the price of grain. Rose was 24 years old, unmarried, and in her father's eyes. That made her a burden that had overstayed its welcome. The price of a daughter Vernon Hatch. Emerged from the dim interior of the trading post, his vest strained against his large belly, his smile revealing tobacco-stained teeth. He was known throughout the territory for his saloon, a rough establishment where miners spent their gold and their dignity. His eyes swept over Rose with the same calculating look he used when evaluating livestock. Thomas cleared his throat. She can cook, clean, and she don't complain much. Strong enough for the work you'd need. His voice carried no affection, only the tired resignation of a man eager to close a deal. Rose felt something crack inside her chest. But her face remained calm. She had expected this day would come. Her mother had died 3 winters past, and without her gentle presence, the Bennett household had become a place of cold utility. Her younger sister had married a rancher and moved south. Her brother Samuel had left to seek gold in California. That left only Rose, and her father had made it clear she was an expense he could no longer justify. Vernon pulled a leather pouch from his coat, the coins inside clinking with promise. "I'll give you a fair price, Thomas. She'll work the kitchen and help with the rooms. Nothing more unless she agrees to it." The last part was said with a wink that made Rose's stomach turn. The stranger's intervention from the shade of the livery stable. A figure moved. Jacob Keller was not a man who drew attention to himself. He lived in the high country, trapping and hunting, coming down to the settlement only when necessary. His clothes were simple buckskin, worn soft from use. His beard was thick and dark, hiding most of his face. His eyes, when visible beneath his hat brim, were the color of river stones. Gray and steady, he walked forward with the unhurried gait of a man who had nothing to prove. The crowd parted slightly, not from fear, but from respect. Jacob was known as fair, honest, and capable. He kept to himself, spoke rarely, never caused trouble. When he reached the trading post steps, he set down a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas. Inside were furs, fine pelts from beaver and mink, the result of months of careful work. He unwrapped them slowly, letting the quality speak for itself. Thomas frowned. "Jacob, we're in the middle of business here." Jacob's voice, when it came, was low and measured. "I'm making an offer."
Ow.
He gestured to the furs. "These for the woman. She comes with me, not as property, as a person who needs a place that's safe." The silence that followed was heavy with confusion and curiosity. Vernon's face reddened. "Now wait just a minute. We already have an arrangement." Jacob turned his gaze to Rose for the first time. His eyes asked a question without words. In them, she saw no hunger, no ownership, no cruelty, only a quiet offer of something she had never been given.
Ow.
Every eye in the settlement seemed to be on her. Her father's face was twisted with anger and confusion. Vernon looked ready to argue, but Jacob simply waited, patient as the mountains themselves. Her voice, when she found it, was steadier than she expected. "I'll go with him." "You'll do no such thing. I'm your father, and I say, you already sold me," Rose interrupted, her words cutting through his bluster. "If I'm to be sold, I choose who I go with." Jacob gathered his furs and handed them to the trading post owner. "Hold these. Fair value for supplies she'll need. Clothing, blankets, tools. Whatever's left is hers to keep or trade." He turned to Rose. "There's a mule tied behind the stable. She's gentle. If you want to come, we leave now." Rose looked at her father one last time. Thomas Bennett's face showed shock, then anger, then something that might have been shame, though it passed too quickly to be certain. She had spent her whole life trying to earn his approval, his affection, even his notice. Now, standing on these worn wooden steps, she realized she had been seeking water from a dry well. She walked past Jacob, down the steps, and around the building to where a gray mule stood patiently in the shade. She had no belongings to gather, nothing to pack. Everything she owned could fit in her pockets. Jacob appeared moments later, leading his own horse. A sturdy roan with kind eyes. He helped her onto the mule without unnecessary contact, then mounted his own horse. Without another word, they rode out of the settlement, leaving behind the stares and whispers and the father who had valued her less than a pouch of coins. The trail to nowhere, and everywhere the path climbed steadily into the foothills. Pine trees grew thicker, their scent sharp and clean after the dust of the settlement. Birds called from hidden branches. A creek ran alongside the trail, its water clear and cold from mountain snow. Jacob rode ahead, but not far, always keeping her in sight. He didn't speak, didn't pressure her, didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. The silence between them was different from the silence of her father's house. This silence felt like respect, like space being given rather than distance being enforced as the sun began its descent. Painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Jacob stopped near a clearing. A small structure stood there, barely more than a frame with walls, its roof incomplete. A fire pit sat in the center of a circle of stones, and nearby, a lean to provide basic shelter. Jacob dismounted and helped her down. His hands were calloused but careful. "This is what I have," he said simply. "It's not finished. It's not comfortable. But it's honest work, and there's no one here who'll harm you or own you." Rose looked at the rough shelter, at the mountains rising beyond, at this strange, quiet man who had traded a season's worth of furs for her freedom. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet, not until she understood what this all meant. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob removed his hat, revealing eyes that held old grief and newer purpose. "Because I remember what it's like to feel trapped. And because no one should be sold like they don't matter," he paused, then added, "you can stay long as you want. Leave whenever you choose. That's the only rule here." For the first time in years, Rose felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it. Hope. Dawn arrived cold and bright in the mountains. Rose woke beneath borrowed blankets in the half-finished shelter, the canvas roof above her patched and worn but functional. Outside, she heard the steady sound of an axe biting wood. She emerged to find Jacob already working, his movements efficient and practiced as he shaped logs for the cabin walls. He nodded in greeting, but didn't stop his work. A pot of coffee sat warming by the fire, and he gestured toward it with his chin. Rose poured herself a cup in a tin mug, the steam rising in the cool mountain air. She watched him work for several minutes before setting down her cup and approaching. "Show me," she said. Jacob paused, axe suspended mid-swing. He studied her face as if checking for certainty, then nodded. He demonstrated how to strip bark, how to notch the logs so they'd fit together tightly, how to judge the straightness of wood with eye and hand. His instructions were simple and clear, never condescending, always practical. Rose's hands blistered that first day. By the third day, calluses began to form. By the end of the first week, she could strip bark almost as quickly as Jacob could. Her movements growing confident and sure, they worked in companionable silence, broken only by necessary words. Jacob pointed out useful plants, showed her where to find fresh water. taught her to read the weather and the behavior of birds and clouds. At night, he maintained his routine of sleeping in the lean-to while she took the shelter. And she began to understand this was his way of showing respect, of proving through action that his word meant something. Lessons written in charcoal one evening. As twilight turned the sky purple, Jacob pulled a flat piece of smooth wood from his pack. With a stick of charcoal, he carefully wrote letters, large and clear. Rose watched, fascinated. "Your name," he said, pointing to the marks. "Rose." She reached out tentatively, her finger tracing the shapes. Her father had forbidden her mother from teaching her to read, claiming it would make her unsuitable for marriage, too proud for her station. Now, staring at these simple marks that formed her own name, Rose felt a door opening in her mind. Jacob showed her the alphabet letter by letter, night after night. He was patient when she forgot, encouraging when she succeeded. Soon, she could write her name, then simple words, then short sentences. Each new word felt like a key, unlocking parts of herself she hadn't known existed. "Why do you know letters?" she asked one night, surprising herself with the question. Jacob added wood to the fire, sparks rising like tiny stars. "My mother was a teacher back east. Before my father moved us west for land, she taught all of us kids, said reading was freedom." She wasn't wrong. Where are they now? His jaw tightened slightly. "Gone. Fever took most of the family. I survived. Sometimes I'm not sure why." Rose understood that feeling, the strange guilt of survival, of being the one left behind. "Maybe so you could be here now," she offered quietly. Jacob met her eyes across the fire, and something passed between them. An understanding that needed no words. Unwelcome visitors. The peace of the mountain was shattered on a cool morning when horses appeared on the trail. Rose's stomach dropped when she recognized her brother Samuel, now returned from California, his clothes dusty from travel. With him rode two rough-looking men, their eyes hard and assessing. Samuel dismounted with exaggerated casualness. "Well, Rose, living like a savage in the woods?" Father's beside himself with shame. Jacob emerged from the cabin, his presence solid and unmovable. "Your sister made her choice. You need to respect that." "My sister," Samuel sneered, "doesn't know what's good for her. Never has. That's why family makes decisions for her." He gestured to his companions. "We've come to bring her back where she belongs." Rose stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice clear. "I'm not going anywhere." Samuel's face darkened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Come peaceful, or we'll take you anyway. That woodsman can't fight all three of us." But before anyone could move, another voice called out from the trees. "Actually, he won't have to fight alone." Margaret Whitfield emerged, leading her horse, a rifle resting casually in the crook of her arm. She was a traveling teacher who moved between settlements, and Rose had met her during a supply trip to the lower valley. Behind Margaret came Helena Cross, a widow who homesteaded nearby, and two trappers who occasionally traded with Jacob. Margaret's eyes were steely despite her gentle smile. "Seems like the lady has made her position clear. I suggest you respect it." Samuel looked around, calculating odds that no longer favored him. His companions shifted uncomfortably, suddenly less eager for confrontation. "This isn't over," Samuel spat. But he was already backing toward his horse.
"Yes.
"It is," Rose said, her voice ringing with new confidence. "Tell Father I'm exactly where I choose to be." They watched the three men ride away, dust rising in their wake. When they were gone, Rose found herself surrounded by people who had come to stand with her, who had recognized her right to choose her own path. Foundations deeper than woodsummer turned to autumn, and the cabin stood complete, its walls tight against the wind, its roof strong against rain. Rose planted vegetables in a small garden plot, and they grew surprisingly well in the mountain soil. Margaret visited regularly, bringing books and teaching Rose to read more complex texts. Helena shared recipes and herbs, and the two women formed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared strength. Jacob remained as he had been, quiet and steady, but Rose began to notice small changes. The way he carved a chair to fit her height perfectly, the shelf he built at eye level for her growing collection of books, the wildflowers that appeared by the cabin door, placed there by hands too shy to present them directly. One evening, As they sat by the fire with Rose reading aloud from a book Margaret had left, Jacob spoke suddenly. "I'm glad you stayed." Rose looked up, meeting his eyes. In them, she saw everything he couldn't say: respect, admiration, and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. "I'm glad you offered me the choice," she replied. The fire crackled between them, and the mountains stood silent witness to something precious being built. Stone by stone, word by word, choice by choice, Rose had left behind a place where she was told she was worthless. Here, in this rough cabin in the high country, she was becoming something she had never been allowed to be before: herself, wholly and completely, with no apologies and no regrets. The mountains would keep their secret, and in their shadow, two wounded souls continued their quiet work of healing, building something that might, in time, be called home.